If I told you eating Vietnamese food is one of the most unhealthy Vietnamese habits you could do, would you believe me? Vietnamese food, on paper, is some of the healthiest food in Asia. It consists of four main ingredients that makes up about 95% of all Vietnamese dishes: vegetables, rice, noodles, and meats. And because Vietnam only uses these healthy ingredients, why do I say Vietnamese food is so unhealthy? Easy: hygiene and preparation. And this comes from gutter oil to refried food to a lot of these vendors using the same plastic gloves every day, all the way to the massive chemicals that are used in the farming. And this includes all the trash and plastic that's burnt in the fields during the burn seasons that they grow the rice, fruits, and vegetables in. They're all covered in microplastics. Food illness and digestive problems in Vietnam are some of the leading issues for Vietnamese when they're going to hospitals. And this leads to long term issues with most locals that you see out here over the age 40, 45. They're suffering and they're hurting from the food. And after 10 years of living out here in Vietnam, I've seen a lot. Maybe too much. And what's crazy is the problems that I see in these far away remote areas with the burning of the trash and the poor hygiene are the same problems I see in all these major cities. I've learned how to eat healthy and how to stay away from a lot of these food problems. And today I'm going to share with you how you can avoid them as well, so you don't come out here and start getting sick or have health problems down the road. Because Vietnamese food at the end of the day is simply amazing. You just got to find the right stuff. So let's get into the meat of this subject and talk about where to buy and where not to buy food in Vietnam. And the most obvious one is going to be the street and the wet markets. This is almost a landmark in Vietnam, but I have found if you're going to go to these street markets, go early. Go very early. The sooner you get there, the better the options are, the fresher the food is. I used to go to these markets at 4 or 5 in the morning where they were still unloading the food. Sure, they got annoyed sometimes because I was trying to grab stuff as they're trying to organize their stuff. But for my safety and my health, it was worth it. And this definitely goes for the meat because the meat sits out all day in the sun. There's fly eggs all over it, and people are constantly poking and punching and touching the meats. You want to get it before this happens. And on top of that, a lot of this food is typically stored on very dirty tables. They're stored on the ground, or they're just thrown on a plastic chair that just sit there. And again, just getting poked at by all these people. You don't want to eat this food. No amount of cooking and boiling is going to reverse this damage. And when it comes to these wet markets, eating the food there, you also got to be careful as well. We were out in a train. There was this like big tourist area where they had a bunch of street vendors, and you could see the street vendors going over to the pond, taking water out so they can make fried noodles. They do this stuff all the time. And one last thing before we get off the wet markets is you have to be careful about the meat. I want to show you some images on the screen. This is an actual Vietnamese customer buying from a Vietnamese staff person selling beef, as they called it, but it was actually pork that was injected with some type of coloring, and they shaved it off and cut it so it looked like beef. You have to be careful with this. We have seen countless stories where they will sell you beef or some kind of pork or something like that and inject it with dog meat or different types of shrimp or something like that. If you have an allergic reaction to a lot of these meats, you have to be careful. And don't be fooled. If the quality is cheap or is expensive, it's still going to be open to having these problems. The hygiene, the bad food practices, these are Vietnamese cultural things. They're not going to change just because there's a big M on the building. So be careful with the wet markets. Now, if I've scared you away, but you're still hungry, the best spot to typically go is a grocery store. And this doesn't mean just a big, large one. There's small ones all over the city areas. And I want to warn you, this isn't me sharing a hack that's going to save you from all the problems that you'll see at a wet market. These problems still happen in these stores. The difference, though, is when they get this food, it's typically packaged immediately and it's taken care of and put in semi-clean areas and buckets and stuff like that, where it's not sitting out in the middle of the road. It doesn't have flies all over it, and people aren't constantly poking at it. When you buy meat at these grocery stores, it's typically bagged up or it's put into a container. When you're buying vegetables, they're typically sprayed down and put into a shelf, not put on the road. But at the end of the day, these fruits, these vegetables, these meats, they come from the same farms, the same locations that these street vendors get. The main advantage here is the food is at least properly handled once they get it. And I know a lot of you are probably watching this video, David, I've been to Delot strawberry farms. It's not like that. You're wrong. It's better than America. I get it. I hear you guys say this all the time, but you're looking at tourist spots. Things like strawberries, durian, jackfruits, all these massive fruits, including rice that are grown in the soil and maintained in Vietnam, are going to go through these issues. Just showed you a text from a friend who is a farmer in Vietnam that sees this process happen. Things like durian, the stinky fruit that everybody tries to get, these are so heavily chemically grown just to keep them clean. So eating these types of things, you're eating these chemicals. You're eating these pesticides in them. Now, when I do get my food, I take it home and I cook it. I do typically ignore and don't use oils. And this isn't because of the whole seed oil fiasco that doctors or different health people talk about how it's bad for you, it's good for you. It's really about the gutter oil. Gutter oil in Vietnam is a real thing. And it happens in big cities like Hanoi and Saigon, and it happens in small villages like Dalat and Phan Thiet. You have to be careful. And this isn't every oil manufacturer. This isn't every product of oil in Vietnam. These are usually found in just random spots, but you never know where those random spots are. We've seen them in Hanoi in massive restaurants, which you would not expect that to be a thing, but it was. But if you're not trying to go to the wet market, you're not trying to go to a grocery store, maybe you're just a tourist hanging out. Where do you eat out? Let's talk about eating out in Vietnam. Now, the most common thing to do as a tourist or somebody that's just here short term, you don't have a condo, you don't have cooking utensils. I get it. So you have to kind of eat out. If you're going to be eating out, you have a lot of options. You have street food, you have restaurants, right? Places like Banh Mi, little kiosks and street vendors are something you need to be careful about. The food is left out all day. They're forking it into a piece of bread and handing it to you. Sometimes they put it in an oven, but that's not going to kill the bacteria. It's just going to heat the bread. On top of that, a lot of the meat in these banh mi's is processed meat. It's not even real. The vegetables have been sitting out for like 7 or 8 hours in the heat, being touched by everybody, using the same glove that they've been using for the last 2 weeks, but putting it on thinking that you're going to think, oh, this is safer than the other spot. They got a glove. It's the same glove all week. Now, the topic comes up all the time. Eating out is so much cheaper than eating in. And this can be true to an extent. Now, I know this topic comes up a lot. You'll see a lot of content around it's cheaper to eat out in Vietnam than it is to actually eat in. This is true if you're a tourist and you don't really have a kitchen. However, you are leveraging your health to get cheaper from the street food. And I want to talk to you about this and the myth that it is actually cheaper to eat out, because it's not in fact cheaper to eat out if you could just eat in, because you could go to a grocery store and buy all this stuff. A lot of this food that you go out and eat, being a sandwich, some soup or something like that, it's typically a lot of processed foods, and then they're throwing sugar on top of that. And then not to mention, after all that, they're throwing some sugar sauce that they call chili sauce on it. So of course it's going to taste really good. You're destroying your dopamine signals at this point with all this sugar. And this also includes drinking beer. If you're going to go out and drink beer, you have to be careful. If they start giving you ice, understand that this ice is typically not filtered bottled water. This is fountain, this is well, this is hose water that they freeze into ice blocks. I don't recommend drinking beer or any kind of soda with local ice provided. Get beer in a can or beer in a bottle. Get a Pepsi or a Coke in the can and drink it out of the can that's already cold. Because the ice that's used in Vietnam is almost never from filtered clean water. Give yourself a few weeks or a month to get used to the food out here. Let your body adjust to the bacteria so you don't immediately get sick from it. And since we're talking about filtered clean water, there's a beer out here. It's called beer hoy. These are alcohols that are made by typically what we call farm beer, where they make it with no regulation, meaning that the water, the chemicals, and the yeast put into these alcohols are not regulated nor filtered correctly. The countless stories of people getting alcohol poisoning from drinking one single beer is insane. And one of the biggest reasons Vietnamese go to the hospital are for food poisoning and alcohol poisoning. So if you're coming out here as a tourist or somebody that hasn't really been in Vietnam that long, you are really putting yourself at risk eating and drinking these types of foods without being aware. And if you do decide to go to a restaurant, be it a cheaper one or a more expensive one, this is kind of a little hack that I've learned in Vietnam over the years. Go to the bathroom before you order. The bathroom could say a lot about a restaurant. A lot of these restaurants will use the bathroom area to maintain their food, clean the vegetables, cut the meat. This isn't unheard of. If it's not really separated from the kitchen area, or it looks like there's utensils in there, I would be a little concerned and maybe consider another restaurant. This isn't limited to just cheap restaurants. I've seen some very expensive hotels that were very shady. So make sure this isn't happening to you. A bathroom in Vietnam can say a whole lot about a restaurant. Don't let the sugar, Don't let the MSG, don't let all the pretty signs fool you. So after this long story of breaking down Vietnamese food and probably killing the hopes of a lot of people that thought Vietnam was the healthiest country in the whole world, what do I personally actually eat living out here for 10 years? Well, I'm glad you asked. In short, eggs, bok choy, sea salt water, and a whole lot of coffee. And when it comes to buying these eggs and these vegetables and the coffee and even the bok choy, I usually buy them in bulk in a local grocery store. I have a refrigerator in my condo, so I do have that advantage. Now, when I live out in the smaller village areas, like I said earlier in this video, go to these wet markets or these street markets a little earlier than the crowd so you can beat a lot of the mess, a lot of the fly eggs, the bacteria, and people poking at all the beef and stuff like that. So wake up an hour early and head over there. Now, because we are going to eat food out here, it's going to be questionable sometimes. I do add a few little hacks to my diet. One of them being sea salt. It gives me the electrolytes and it keeps my body strong with some minerals. And also, every morning when I wake up, I break apart 3 raw cloves of garlic. I let them sit out for about 3 to 5 minutes, and then I just eat them down raw, whole. What this does is it removes a lot of the metals and bad things from your body. Kind of think of it as a medicine almost, but as a food. This is something I've been doing over the years, and I've noticed a lot of improvements doing this because a lot of the seafood and a lot of the vegetables are going to have a lot of metals on them simply because of the chemicals and what's in the water out here. And finally, when it comes to the drinking and the beer, I will typically buy 5 to 7 beers, drink them all down, and then I will head out to a bar and I'll order bottled or canned beer at these restaurants. I typically avoid draft beers and I usually avoid having the actual water or the bar girl bring in over the ice to put in my glass. I just drink cold cans of beer. If they don't offer it, I'll get cold bottles. Whatever works. So many people out here, even in Da Nang, I see get sick simply because of the ice that they have in their beer. Wasn't even the beer, it was just the ice. This water isn't safe. So I hope that gives you a breakdown of what it's like out here. And the diet that I kind of shared with you has allowed me to lose 25 pounds. If you're one of these budget travelers that are trying to live in Vietnam for $500 to $800 a month, this is a great way to do it and also saving your health. So you're not spending all this money going to doctors because you're constantly getting sick. The number one reason Vietnamese go to hospitals is usually due to food and alcohol poisoning.